Jordan, I'm a big fan, but we don't do intros. We do start every Dynasty Trades in 5 show with a trade, though. So we got a 12-team Superflex PPR 1.75 tight end premium start 10. Are you going Bijan Robinson or Kyren Williams, Nico Collins, and a 25 second? Go ahead, man.
I'm taking Bijan Robinson, and I like the other players on the other side. I am a huge Nico Collins guy. And I like sort of the concept of Kyren Williams. Part of the problem with this, though, is there's only one asset in this trade that's truly different in terms of like relative to his position. Right, the other ones you can fill in.
Right.
I don't know. Like, I can't convince myself, no matter kind of how much I look at the data on Kyren Williams, that he's a long-term player just based on his pedigree, his profile, and what he did in college. Like, I just can't get myself to that. So I'm going to err on the.
Can't get there, huh?
I'm going to err on the conservative side of Kyren Williams, and that's probably like it's going to take kind of a while for me to sort of be on the other side of that. I just sort of lag players like Kyren Williams. So that's kind of the aspect of it. Again, I really like Nico Collins, but I don't think you pay for Nico Collins through trading off of Bijan in a package, right? That's not the type of trade that I like to make. I think that your goal in Dynasty is to accumulate as many top 30 players as you can get, and you hoard them and you don't give them away. You don't trade off of them, right? You're always trying to trade up, not down. And especially at this time of the season, I think it's particularly true where we're heading into the off season. The top 30 players in Dynasty end up being the really durable ones. They end up being the players that don't get drafted with competition. They aren't susceptible to as many of the market forces that players, much further down the board are.
Right.
And if, for example, Houston were to draft a wide receiver in the first round of the draft, which I don't think is an impossible thing to happen this year,
Sure.
This trade is a disaster, right? As much as I like Nico Collins. So I think for all of those reasons, especially this early in the offseason, you take the most bankable, high level asset and you just hold on to it.
No, for sure. Love it. So the reason I wanted to start with a running back trade is because I'm so curious as to what the future of the running back position is. I mean, we've seen it, we've experienced it in our leagues, especially like, some of the more not expert leagues, but the less casual, let's say. You can't move a running back. Everybody is player agnostic when it comes to the running back position. It's a week to week proposition. But is there going to be a course correction, or do you even agree with that? I'm just wondering what the future is with RB. It's becoming a really gross position. What have you done for me lately? Position. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to be careful about kind of buying high on some of these limited profiles, right? Again, so I am going to be concerned about a guy like Kyren Williams. I'm not going to sort of buy his like a really high price for him. That's just generally how I'm going to err, right? And I think a lot of times at running back, you can get away with, playing it. It's a volume position. And the thing that I think about running back a lot, when you can look at a couple of ways, right? On a week, it is a week to week game, right? So we play Dynasty. It's a long-term game, but the running back position is a week to week position, right? And if there is an injury, right, you might get a spot start from a player, right? And then the next week you might get a spot start from a different player. Right. And so you can kind of play that game over and over and over again throughout the season. I actually think this year, it's funny because I think this year it has a potential to be my most profitable year. And
yeah, really? Yeah. Good for you.
In reality, none of my backup running backs really hit, which is odd, right? You wouldn't really have expected that to happen, kind of the way it did. But you just look at where the running backs came from. In terms of the guys, in terms of just go down the points list, right? I mean, Kyren Williams was an afterthought. He's running back 2 in points per game. Raheem Mostert, an absolute afterthought, running back 4 in points per game. Devon Achane, third, consistently in the second round of rookie drafts, right? Rachaad White, consistently in the second round of rookie drafts last year, right? Saquon Barkley, largely, in the offseason was kind of beaten down because of some of his recent production. Etienne, same thing. Like no one thought he could score touchdowns. He scored 9 of them this year, right? Then you get Breece Hall, Montgomery, Montgomery was available well outside the top 15 running backs, and then James Cook was well outside the top 25 running backs. Right? That's what I just described about between 6 and 8 of the running backs in the top 12.
Yeah.
Right. So again, they come from a lot of different places, and I think because of that, like, you have to be in the volume business at the position, and I want to be taking a lot of shots. So what ends up happening is up at the top of the board, I'm super when in doubt, let's say I'm going to choose between a high price running back and a high price wide receiver. I'm almost always going to take the wide receiver in that perspective. It has nothing to do with longevity, has nothing to do with value. It has nothing to do with that. It has totally to do with roster construction, right? Because if instead of taking, I don't know, Jonathan Taylor, I take Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Yep. What that allows me to do is shrink my receiving depth chart on my team, because I'm playing Amon-Ra St. Brown every week, and I'm going to pair him with guys that I'm going to play every week. Like, I'm going to pair him with cheaper guys like Keenan Allen, like Mike Evans, like Brandon Cooks types, like Amari Cooper types. I'm just going to pair him with that, and I'm going to roll with 4 of them or so, and then I'm going to just play. I'm just going to douse my entire bench with running backs, right? And they're going to be the Kyren Williams types. They're going to be the Mostert types. They're going to be all these injury away type guys, and you can just sort of load up on them and hope to catch some of these situations. And honestly, like, I think the lesson from this is, like, you don't try and be super specific. Right. I think if anything, that the lesson that I've learned from the position over the past couple of years is don't pick favorites. Just pick a lot of them. Right. Just pick a lot of them, because I would have never
exactly a lot of darts, take a lot of shots.
Right. And I could have never gotten to a process that would have been like Kyren Williams would be a top 5 running back. That would have never happened. Right. I could have not
talking about an outlier
around an algorithm that would have said that to me. So my lesson from a lot of these things is you take pedigree, and then you just take a ton of shots. And that's kind of my approach to it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about content creation, growing a brand. One of us on this show tonight has written books actually on top of that. But I can't help myself. We got to keep talking Dynasty here for a bit. So when I asked Scott if he played in leagues with you, I knew the answer was going to be yes, but he said a few. He practices what he preaches. So Jordan, what do you preach, man?
Elite quarterbacks, proven wide receivers, and a ton of running backs. And in tight end premium leagues, I prioritize the position.
So prioritize, I guess. Talk to me about what are you doing with TJ Hawkinson right now?
So I think the tight end position is in a really interesting spot, because I think it's better than it has been in any real recent memory, in terms of just the let's say the top 15 guys or so are better than it has been in recent years. I was just looking at this last night. If you look at, I just went back the last, I think 5 years or so. There's been 2 wide receivers. I think it was since 2020 that I looked at the data, that have finished with 90 catches that are not named Travis Kelce. Mark Andrews once, Darren Waller once. Currently, there's 2 of them just this year, and we have 2 weeks to go. Right. Yes, I don't think we're going to get a third. Kelce is one of them. And then it's Ingram is actually leading the position, followed by TJ Hawkinson. I don't think there's going to be anyone that's going to get to 90, that's out there. I think the next person's at 75. So it would take a lot. It would take a lot to get there in 2 weeks. The next one is Joku's at 75. It's not impossible, but it would be a lot to ask. But I think generally speaking, that is representative of the position as a whole, just being better, right? I mean, just this year, right? It's very rare you see maybe 10 or so guys have double-digit points. Right now, that's up to 11. Dallas Goedert's at 9.9, so you're right about at 12.
Right there.
You usually see between about 7 to 9 or so of those guys, right? This year, we've got 8 guys above 11 points per game. And so I think that's pretty encouraging. The thing that I would sort of caution people on is the flip side of that is they're in regular PPR scoring. There are, wide receiver 3 in points per game is at 13.7. Wide receiver 11 is at 10.5. Right. And if you kind of do the math on that, that equates to about a third of a win difference over the course of a regular season. So it's not a huge difference. And so I think one of the things that's interesting is the position's really deep. And if you're just willing to say, I'm just going to I don't care exactly who I get in this range, I just want one in this range, I think it's going to open up a lot of trading opportunities, right? If the person really isn't named Mark Andrews or probably Laporta at this point, right? I don't care who I have as much as I just want one of them, and I'm kind of willing to trade, between them.
Sure.
Kelsey, we'll kind of see how he ends up, and if he comes back, and I don't know, he could retire. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that could happen with him, but he would fit in that category of guys that I'd probably prioritize as well.
Yeah, Shane keeps saying he's going to be a backup dancer for Taylor Swift here next year. I bought him in I guess 2 leagues as like a final like hopeful hammer, like especially in a start night, like a shallow start night. It was a minimal tight end premium, but I was like, I need a hammer in this roster, and he has not done that thus far. He needs to tighten his ass up now. He's a beast. It's so funny when people crack on Travis Kelce. It's like, really, man, look what he has done for us.
Yeah, no, he's totally. And the interesting part is the tight end position is one you can play until you're 38.
Yeah,
I mean, we've seen Gates, we've seen Witten, we've seen Gonzalez, right? We've seen these guys play deep into their into their later 30s. I kind of wonder though, like, where it's such a star, right? Where he's such a star player, right? He's probably, of the quarterbacks, of the guys that are not quarterbacks, I don't know, he's in the top 3 of recognizable NFL players that aren't quarterbacks. I mean, he might even be number 1. I don't know. That's not my expertise in terms of that stuff, but like, he seems to be on a lot of commercials, right? And when my mother-in-law says Taylor Swift's dating the handsome guy from the insurance commercials, like, that seems to be like one of the few people that you can say that about in terms of my mother-in-law who does not watch football, that she would know that. So that brings with it some opportunities, right? And so I think he's got a media career if he wants it. He's got a lot of other opportunities that he could have. And I kind of wonder if, like, you see this with guys like Gronkowski, like, I don't know if, like, your star is so bright, I don't know if it just kind of burns out or if it kind of fades with him. Like, he could probably continue to play into his later 30s, right? He hasn't gotten away with being like this dominant physical guy. He's gotten away with more improvising, right? That's kind of the magic between him and Mahomes. And so I do kind of wonder, like, what path he's going to choose, because if he's going to play 2 or 3 more years, he's going to be undervalued, right? Because if he kind of goes on that Witten track, like, it's going to be super playable, right? Those guys, as long as they're in the league, like any data and history would tell you, as long as they're in the league and playing starter snaps, they're going to be very valuable in terms of production. So I'm kind of curious to see what he does in terms of that trajectory, because he would be one of the guys that I could say kind of go out near the top. And he's 34, like, he's not young. So and he's talked a little bit about it. It's got to be on his mind. I don't think Taylor Swift has anything to do with it, but I do think that when you get to that age, like, him and his brother have talked about it. So it's something that we have to consider.
Yeah, I mean, he could at any time. I just don't feel like it's going to be after this year, and that's just a hunch, and my hunch isn't worth anything, but. Or maybe that's fingers crossed kind of situation. But yeah, the tight end is going to be interesting moving forward because Laporta hitting, Kincaid looking good. We have Brock Bowers coming out. I don't know, especially in casual leagues, in casual non-tight end premium leagues, Bowers is going to probably have a lot of juice for better or worse. Don't you think? I mean, when you say heavy tight end premium leagues and you're aggressive getting them, are you talking 1.75, 2.0 and like start 2 tight end? Do you play in some formats like that as well? I'm sure.
I play in 2 PPR, which I treat as a 2 tight end league.
Yeah.
I think your advantage is to lean extremely into that edge. I do play in some 2 tight end leagues. I think Scott's in my 2 tight end league, if memory serves, in one of them. But I look at the position. I think Bowers is really interesting because I've seen him ranked over Laporta. I think that's crazy talk. I think if Kyle Pitts has taught us anything, it's that talk. You can't project a tight end coming into the league to perform elite. You just can't do it, no matter what the prospect profile is, because it's a really, really hard position to do that. And so we've seen Laporta do elite stuff. We've seen Andrews do elite stuff. We've seen these guys do elite stuff. I wouldn't even put Hawkinson in that category, right? I think that the number of guys that have done elite stuff are probably on 3 fingers, In terms of that, it's Kelsey, it's Laporta, and it's Andrews. In terms of that stuff, in terms of trajectory stuff, Hawkinson's a tier below that. But I think you start putting Bowers kind of up in that range. It's a really dangerous and sort of fraught thing, right? If I've seen him as high as like tight end 3. I think I saw him over Andrews. I mean, you can't do that, right? You can't do that. And especially, this is now a different position, right? Like a couple of years ago, you would have been like when Pitts came in, the position wasn't very good. But now you look at guys at tight end who 26 or younger that are averaging double-digit points per game. It's Hawkinson, it's Laporta, it's Komet, it's McBride, it's Ferguson, right? Like there's some real names. I mean, Kincaid is just outside of that. So there's some real names there with some guys that have pedigree. That's a good, it's like when receiver, like it went through like 3 or 4 years of just outright busts kind of in the back of that 2014 class. Like there was some real bust classes in there, and it really kind of thinned out that, the sort of what you would consider like middle-aged wide receivers right now. And that kind of happened for a while at tight end. You just didn't get a lot of backfill. Now we're getting that young backfill. And I think the position's in really good shape compared to what it's been.
Tight end. Scott's a big tight end guy as well.
Scott actually wrote a tight end premium chapter in one of my books. Yeah. So he's been kind of at the forefront of the value of it. Right. And it's one of those things where if you're deep at tight end in a premium league, like again, I joke that the off season is bikini contest season, where everyone wants to post their pictures on social media and get compliments about them. But in reality, right, your money is made when snow is falling and when there's when you're not wearing a bathing suit, right, when in December. And awesome. Being deep at tight end right now, I mean, no one was lauding rosters that had Evan Ingram and David Njoku on it.
No,
right? No one cared.
Loving it now.
No one cared. And you want to know what? That is not a shield. That is a sword you're wielding at people right now in those leagues. I mean, just crushing people in the flex with those two guys right now. And I look at that and I think the tight end position, because people will get annoyed by it, but if you know how to do it right and you kind of understand the position, you absolutely can you can pick up a win on your opponents just by operating the flex position correctly in tight end premium leagues. It's just an absolute weapon to be exploited.
I love it, man. I love exploit, weapon,
yes.
Disrupt, those power words. So I'm going to put something up here. We're going to switch a little bit over to content creation. We're going to leak back into Dynasty, of course. But I'm going to put an overlay on here. The reason why I had thought, that's good, covering your face. Perfect, right? Does it look good, crowd? No.
Yeah, it's the best my face has looked in months. So yeah, it's great.
No, but so the reason, I guess, part of the reason I had you on is I sent out this tweet saying, could you use your help for a Trades in 5 show, whether it be on YouTube, pod, etc. What experts in the community would you call being a quote unquote content creator? So I was undercaffeinated apparently, and I said an individual or team that makes and distributes content in a unique and effective way. Well, a couple people mentioned at McNamara Dynasty. And I had heard of you before and followed you on Twitter. Great follow on Twitter. Funny follow on Twitter. So talk to me, man. Why do you think you were mentioned? You were tagged twice, and then somebody in the DMs actually hit me up and said, "Oh, Jordan's on tonight. That's gonna be sick. He's awesome." So talk to me, man. Why were you mentioned?
I wouldn't consider myself an expert. So that's the one thing. I sort of pride myself on what I don't know. Right. In terms of recognizing what we don't know and using that to our advantage. Right. So, when people ask me specific players, when people ask me a lot of things, I think a lot of times my answers to those questions are based in a ton of uncertainty. Right. And that's the way I play the game. Right. And it's funny because just today, the fantasy receipts king guy or whatever, the account tried to flame me on a trade that I said it was from like 18 months ago. And it said something to the effect of Isaiah Pacheco for Tyrion Davis Price in a 2023 second. And I said, it's something like you can bleed your leagues dry doing this. right?
Yeah. Or it's like death by 1,000 cuts or
Yes, but
something like that.
yeah, it's killing him by 1,000 cuts. And
I'm gonna try to
that's
share
not
it
to mean
here and
that's
we
a
can
huge
pull it up.
win, right? That's not to mean that trade is a huge win. Right? And when people send me trades, like sometimes they're huge wins. That trade was the right process, right?
Yes.
That trade was the right process. And the way I think about that is, if given the opportunity to do this 1,000 times, which side would you take? Would you take the guy that was drafted in the 7th round with a 251st pick? And by the way, both of them rookies. Okay. Would you take the guy that is the 251st pick in the draft with a hit rate of something less than 10% historically? Or would you take the guy in the 3rd round with a hit rate around 40% historically, plus a second, which has a hit rate of, we'll call it about 35% historically? Okay. The answer to that question, the answer to that question has to be the package side. It has to be. Okay.
100%.
Especially when they come in as rookies. Now, is that trade going to miss? Did I lose that? Did the package side of that trade lose? Probably, right? Some people have come back, and actually, this is the most support I've gotten on social media in months. People are like, that pick could have been.
They were like, it wasn't bad. There was like good players going around that. And everybody was like, you're digging deep, fantasy receipts.
Yeah. This is the most support I've gotten from Twitter in months. So that was encouraging. But I think the thing about that is like, I don't have to really know the difference between, right? I'm just kind of using base rates, right? Like, and I think it's funny, like we can talk about a guy like Puka Nacua. This is similar type situation. But you look at a guy and you just kind of apply the base rates to these things, and you have to be super convinced and really, really, really sure of yourself to go against that historically. And that's kind of the way that I look at it, right? So I'm just kind of playing the odds on these things. Again, I understand players, I follow players, I do a lot of analysis on players, but ultimately at the end of the day, I come back to, I have to be super convinced to move off the base rate, especially of incoming rookies. And when you get a chance to do a trade like that, right? If I get the chance to do that trade 1,000 times, I'm going to crush that trade. Going to crush it. If you give me 7th round rookie versus a 3rd round rookie and a future second, I'm going to crush that trade. Crush it. Right. That's the type of trade that if you make it a couple times a year, you're going to be way ahead at the end of the day. Right. If that person's not named Tyrion Davis-Price, if the person's named Brian Robinson or Rashad White,
exactly.
Right.
Totally
or if it's not Isaiah Pacheco, it's somebody else, right? If it's I don't even remember who the other 7th round picks of that were, but you kind of get the idea, right? Like if you just sort of apply those kind of principles, and you just use the profiles of the players instead of the specific players. I think that's super important, right? And so that's the thing that really governs me as a dynasty player, and ultimately as a dynasty analyst. And I kind of find it funny when people call me an expert, because my expertise is just saying, appreciating the uncertainty of the game, right?
Yeah,
and all of it's covered in
embracing the variance and stuff. Yep.
Yeah. Right. And embracing what we don't know and harnessing ways to kind of reduce that risk. Right. And I think so it's funny to me that people consider me an expert, because I don't purport to be an expert in like player analysis, right? Unless it's quarterbacks. Right. But by the way, like a guy, if you just look at the rest of that draft, there was actually, I don't think any other 7th round running backs were drafted in that class. But you just look at some of the other guys that even like right above him, like Tyler Beatty and Tristan Ebner, like, the odds of hitting.
I'm sure they're still on some of my teams. I'm sure they're living on some MFL teams because I can't even log onto that freaking platform.
Right. Kevin Harris, right? Like those are the guys that are sort of in that range, and then actually, 100 picks earlier is Kyren Williams. So it's funny, like you kind of look at some of those, but overall, like if you'd made that trade, if you just kept making that trade, like I think you'd be much more ahead, over the long term. So that's kind of my approach. So I might have got far afield of your question.
You're good, man. You're good. It's when it's my show, my stream, it's very loose. Let's just say that. I mean, Jordan, we had an extensive show sheet for tonight, right?
Yeah,
right. No show sheet for tonight.
Yeah, no show sheet survives my podcast appearances, unfortunately.
So I'm gonna put this up there though too, just kind of along the lines of why people tagged you. So I wanted to hear your answer. I asked you first why you were tagged, but Tommy Blair was one of the folks who tagged you saying Jordan McNamara all day. So I asked him why, so I could share this. So if it's Jordan, I think he's probably the most willing to live on an island from the temperamental and often inaccurate dynasty trade market, using data as the backbone and as a sword that he wields primarily to destroy you at quarterback and tight end. I've read all of his AOD books and used his base rates and work with AWARP to refine how I play Dynasty. He was the one who convinced me to go any RB on a 53 before it was cool, and led me to the repeatability of AWARP advantages in chasing elite profiles. If there's any subscription your listeners should pay for, aside from ours, of course, it's at AOD. So that's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's got to feel cool to read and see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's it's funny because all of my work has basically come from trying to answer why I failed. Right. And, AWARP was one of those things, right? The rookie base rates. I mean, I literally became a quote dynasty analyst and ultimately wrote my first book about dynasty fantasy football because at 206 in a rookie draft, I took Kiaris Garrett. And if you're wondering who Kiaris Garrett is, he is a rookie that was highly sort of touted that ended up going undrafted that never recorded any stats in the NFL. Okay. He's a wide receiver out of, I think, Tulsa, if memory serves. But that's neither here nor there. He was an undrafted rookie that I took in the second round of rookie draft at wide receiver, which is a horrendous bet. And I learned a lot from that experience, which was like, okay, well, what should a second round pick mean to us, right? What types of profiles should we start looking at there? And that's really the research that sort of came out of that experience was I can't keep doing this. I can't keep making those mistakes. How did I make that mistake? And how did I fail? And so all of my AOD research is basically kind of stemmed from that. And so, the AWARP thing, right? It's been cool to see people kind of pick up on that.
Yeah, it is starting to heat up a bit for sure.
And it's funny because like people ask me like, do you think your advantage will go away? I'm like, we'll keep changing stuff, right? We'll keep sort of seeking out edges. But I don't think like you still look around your dynasty leagues and I still don't see a lot of rosters that look like mine, right? And so
yeah, there you go.
A couple more might, but that doesn't mean my edge has gone away. It just means that my edge has been reduced a little bit, right? I do think like. If anything has sort of come from it, it's, people value backup running backs more than they did before I started talking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's all me. I think other people have sort of either picked up on that, found it on their own. People that I've worked with have pitched that. I know Chad's big on that. Chad Parsons,
Yep.
We hosted a Football Guys show for 3 years, I think. And then now we do Dynasty Think Tank together. We've been hosting podcasts together for, I think, 7 years. Right. So like we've kind of very much think along similar lines. And I think, our research has either, tracked each other's or, kind of led each other in a similar fashion. I know Scott talks about that, right? Other people are kind of on this idea. So I don't think I'm alone on an island. But I do think I think being contrarian is in a game where it's 1 out of 12 win. If you're contrarian and you're right, that has a huge implication, right? Because if you're contrarian and right in a game where 1 in 12 people win, right? There's a huge, and where it's like 6 or 7x the payout when you're right.
Yeah, right.
Like the consequences of that are enormous. And so that's actually, one of the things that people talk about, like the stock market approach or like the portfolio approach. I actually sort of totally reject that idea. Because I don't think my goal isn't to be sort of at the market average, right? My goal is to be a top. Really going into the season, my goal is to be a top 2 team because I want to earn a bye, right? I don't think you can do that by going and saying, all right, I want to play at the market rates, right? So I think that requires you to do some things differently, right? I think it requires you to reject what a lot of people enjoy. Which is, I'll probably be forever known, right? When my fantasy obituary is written, I'll be known as the anti George Pickens guy, right? And the anti George Pickens guy is, I think George Pickens is a great example of all that I've learned. Because 5 years ago, Jordan would have been all over George Pickens. Oh, look at this encouraging rookie profile, all this stuff. But as I've learned more, and as I've studied more, and as I've incorporated more of this research in my books and in my analysis, it's taken me from like, oh, look, shiny, flashy guy. Right? And then to say, okay, well, look, the yardage total is really good. And then it's taken me to a more like a 300 level aspect of saying, well, is what does that production actually mean, right? And what was that production based on, right? And what it was based on was huge volume, right? And not in a way that's like efficient. It's just playing a lot of snaps, which is a good thing. You want to play a lot of snaps, but it wasn't efficient. And a lot of his production and the stuff that people really enjoyed about him was his contested catches and all that stuff.
Sure.
Which is, my research indicated, was entirely random year over year. Right? Like, that's not a stat after 1 year.
It's nothing predictable. Yeah.
Right. You can't say after 1 year that George Pickens is predictably good at that. You can say that he performed really well at it last year, but that has no relationship to what it's going to be this year. And by the way, he's terrible at it this year. Right. So again, you start looking at that, and I've found some other metrics and stuff along that lines, but all of that is to say, like, I have sort of come to appreciate that profile, right? Sort of that up and coming wide receiver who, quote, could be a star, is a trap. And as a class, I avoid that. With some rare exceptions, I avoid that class. And what I do is basically just say, fine, screw it. I'll take Mike Evans. Right. I'll take Keenan Allen cheaper.
There you go.
And, the thing that people will sort of come back to and say, like, well, you can't live like that forever. Yeah, you can, because what ends up happening is you make trades from your depth at running back to get wide receivers. Like I did that to get Christian Watson this year. I did that to get, I actually did. Chad and I did one. I think Scott might even be in the league. Chad and I did it for Quentin Johnson, who I don't even a huge fan of, but we got him for like a 3rd round pick. Like, you do stuff like that where what you end up doing is you buy those profiles, you buy those you buy those young receivers, but you buy them at cheap. You don't pay a high price, right? And I think that's kind of the thing. Or you buy the elite guys, right? Like you buy the Amon-Ra St. Brown profile on the way up, right? You buy the Puka Nacua profile on the way up. You buy the, it didn't work out, but you buy the Christian Watson profile, right? Where you say, hey, if this turns out right, like if he can stay healthy, that outlook could be AJ Brown. Right. Like that's the types of bets you make, as opposed to making one on a guy like George Pickens, has kind of always been my thought. So that has taken me to a place where I'm willing to stand on an island, because I don't think the George Pickens profile pays off. Right. I think people are trapped by that, but they like it because it feels good. And I don't care how it feels. I just want to win.
Yeah, we've talked about that on Trades in 5 too, how in terms of how we're going to play rookie drafts next year. I mean, obviously there's a lot of fluidity. So much comes into play, league economy, value of picks. But in terms of like the picking of players, a lot of it will just be making sure you're picking an asset that's liquid, that's valuable, that has some kind of appeal to the market as well. So obviously you're very heavy into the analytics, but talk to me about how league economy and psychology works into how you play. Or are you just trusting the numbers? What does that pie look like, Jordan, in terms of how much data you look at and then how much you're playing the people?
So I think that in Dynasty, I think it's really hard to predict future valuations, because I a lot of times think that the Dynasty marketplace will do things that make no sense. Right. We'll evaluate, or not that they don't make any sense, but that the basis for that is wrong. Right. So for example, I thought George Pickens was overvalued, and I could point out a million reasons why I thought that was true, and it wouldn't move the market. I tried to point out a million reasons why the market was wrong on Justin Fields, and it didn't really move the market. And so I think you have to be careful about trying to say, I need to follow along because everyone else thinks this is valuable. And I think you got to be really careful playing that game. right? So what's much more predictable is player production profiles, right? To say, Mike Evans might go down in price, but I have a pretty good, like, if I had to bet on him to get 1,000 yards, like that's a pretty good bet historically,
Yes.
right?
It's
100%.
It's 100% correct.
I might actually get in trouble because I wrote at Football Guys this week. Matt Waldman does our roundtables, and I'm a staff writer over there. And he asked, like, which veteran do you basically, are you convinced of that'll be a starter next year? And it was like Mike Evans and a whole bunch of other people. And my answer was Mike Evans. And I said, he's 1,000-yard receiver every year, and I will not stop believing that until he doesn't do it. Yeah. And it was like, period. And it was like a 45-word answer, which is well below the minimum threshold. That's exactly what I believe, right? So I didn't need to write any more. Like, that's exactly the process that I'm going to go through, because any situation that you've ever bet against Mike Evans, you've been wrong, right? And so,
absolutely.
So that's kind of the thought there. But yeah. So again, I think that there's undervalued aspects of Dynasty, which, I'll give you a good example. At the same price, a wide receiver who has hit before, right, who has a top 24 seasonal finish in total points, is substantially more likely to hit again than a wide receiver who has not hit for a top 24 seasonal finish. Okay. Yep. So, and when you get, so if you have 2 5th-round wide receivers, right, that let's say they're, 19 and 20 in ADP, right? They're right next to each other. The guy that's hit, substantially better odds to hit again, right? Because what is baked into that other guy is a ton of age premium. Like, that's how he's that valuable. And so I have just basically come to say, I'm going to reject that age premium. Right. And so that leaves me on an island. And so it leaves me a lot of times without a lot of great trades to make in the offseason, because I don't have that sort of flashy guys.
Yeah, the sexy days. You can't move like Mike Evans. Even Tyreek in the offseason isn't the time to move him. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times my Julys will be kind of boring, right? Like, because I won't be in a ton of trade negotiations, but my team will be, my Decembers are very exciting because I'm playing for championships, right? That's kind of the trade. Love it. The other thing that I've kind of learned to do is, like, I don't pick favorites in rookie drafts. Like, I've learned that lesson hard. I don't try to pick the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, right? If there's going to be 5 first-round wide receivers this year, I want to be in on the 4th and 5th one off the board. I don't want to be in on 1, 2, or 3, because ADP historically hasn't been predictive of success. Neither is where they've gone in the NFL draft. And so my position to sort of, how do you sort of get younger at wide receiver while playing the old guys? Well, it's to just trade down and just take one, right? I don't pick wide receivers. I take them. And that's kind of the couple of edges that I've sort of run up and had some success with.
This is crazy, man. When you're talking, I'm like totally focusing, but at the same time, you make me think of my teams so much. When I'm like going through like matchups, like, oh man, what Jordan's saying, like, should I do this or that? Because where I'm at right now, and this is not necessarily on topic, but this is championship week. I'm looking at my squads, and I'm in 4 championships. I'm pretty stoked about it. 2 of them are the Dynasty Trades and 5 listener leagues, so that's fun. But I'm going through, and it's like, do I want to buy like an old hammer? Like, do I want to spend big? Do I want to give Shane? Are you in this audience? Shane, if you're in here, send me a Tyreek Hill offer in the Squirt League. But do I want to spend on Tyreek, who's got a bad matchup? Do I want to spend less on Mike Evans? Amari Cooper is another option, has a bad matchup. Talk to me about how you play. And yes, this is a start-sit question, Jordan McNamara. How do you play like bad matchups mixed with the dynasty value of these old guys, if that makes any sense? Like buying a Mike Evans at cost or buying a Tyreek Hill?
I mean, in one game sample sizes, you got to be careful about it, right? Like, you got to be super careful about, like, what's the odds that Mike Evans outproduces Tyreek Hill this week? Like, it's a decent chance.
It is so, at Baltimore for Tyreek.
Yeah, and Mike Evans is getting New Orleans without Marshawn Lattimore, right? Yep. So, you got to be careful. Like, I think the way to kind of look at that is you make a dynasty trade, right? If you
Love it.
say, okay, this is going to juice up my lineup, but I come back to, I don't know, right? I kind of answer a lot of these questions with, I don't know. And if the answer is, I don't know, well, okay, well, like, how confident should I be, right? That's again, like, this is kind of a great example of what I'm talking about a lot of times. And you should say, okay, well, which one's the right price from a dynasty? If the season ends tomorrow, right, how am I going to feel about the valuation that I paid, right? Independent of whether I won this year. And then you kind of view it that way. And then I think, backtrack and say, okay, the season's going to end a day before that price. How do I feel about that?
Yep.
And kind of sort of judge it from there. But if I was going to make a dynasty trade right now, and I'm a contender, I'm still in it, I would view it. I think the way that I would view it is I would think about, like, okay, the season ends on Sunday. I don't think there's a Monday night game this week, right? I think it ends on Sunday. The season ends on Sunday. How would I feel about this Monday morning? Right.
Yeah.
And if the answer is I feel good about it, then I probably should make the trade. And if the answer is, well, it depends on how I did on Sunday, you got to be careful about that, right? Because, if things don't go your way, then you've just done something stupid, right? Like, so that's the thing that you got to be really, really careful about.
No, for sure. And there's one trade in particular that I'm thinking about, and then I'm going to ask you. We'll pivot back to something else, but it's a 12 team. Look at me being selfish. It's like, oh, I got Jordan McNamara on. I'm going to ask him about a trade here. No, but 12 teams start 9, so it's shallow, half PPR. It's full PPR for tight ends. I lost Chase, and is it still looking like he's out this week?
I saw he walked.
Most signs are pointing to he walked through today.
I think I can check. Go ahead.
So
I saw him participate, but I haven't checked the wire yet.
So the trade that I sent the other day, it was before this past week. I sent Chase for Amon-Ra and what's projected to be an early 24 second. Now, if Chase is out again, you mentioned making a dynasty trade.
Today. He DNP'd today.
Did not practice. Okay, so practice. What do you think about that? I see Genji, I maybe butchered that name in the chat. No thanks. What do you think, man? Jamar Chase or Amon-Ra in an early second?
Can you make it a 2 for 2?
I want to make a ship.
Can you make it a 2 for 2? Can you make it a bigger deal? Whenever there's a situation like that, I say I don't reject it out of hand. I say, can I make it a 2 for 2 deal where I feel, a 2-player for 2-player deal, and you might still have to give a pick or whatever, but can I do something? Can I use this trade as a vehicle to do something else, whether it's roster construction, whether whether it's some sort of ancillary objective, to sort of use that as the vehicle to do it. Right. And so, whether that is,
so it's like a QB pivot up, maybe as yes, like part of it.
Right.
Yeah. So big building in something like that. No, right. I love it.
And I haven't done much trading. My leagues don't stay open typically this late, so I haven't really been in that mindset. But I'm thinking, like, is there a quarterback move, right? Like, for example, let's just use an example. If I have Justin Herbert and I have Jamar Chase, right? Mm-hmm. Can I go to Lamar Jackson, right? Does that person still that's not contending this year still view Herbert more valuable than Lamar Jackson? I don't know the answer to that question, but that would be something I would explore, right? And so it's just the counter that I would send back would be, hey, let's sort of flip that. And then what you're doing with that is saying, okay, now I'm getting a leverage at quarterback this week, and I view the guys similarly long term, right? I kind of think about it like that. Which would be kind of what I would think in that sort of space. Is there some other move that you can make, right? Is there something at tight end that you want to do? It's something like that. I would sort of try and add to that. I am a huge fan of Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Oh, me too, man. I've got luckily so much Amon-Ra.
Yeah. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I am going to probably err to the side of like having him pretty close to Jamar Chase in terms of fantasy valuation, in terms of dynasty valuation. So, and I think that like he could, I am not in any way a self-interested party with props for him to lead the league in reception.
Nothing like, there's nothing. There's no money on the line.
Or CD Lamb to lead the league in receptions. And I'm super excited about watching Saturday night. Those things are not influenced by that at all. But yeah, I mean, I view him like right there after, I view Jefferson as 1, I view Chase in a tier below that. And then I view the guys after that in a tier. And I think you can put him in a lot of different ways, right? I think you could put, you could sort of re-rack that I don't know, like 3 through
like
8 at wide
AJ
receiver,
Brown will
whatever
be
that tier
swapped
is.
with, yeah.
You could throw it in like one of those Yahtzee tumblers and throw it out on the table, and it could come out in any order, and I'd be like, I can't really argue with that, and like you could do it again, and I'd be like, I can't really argue with that either. Like,
Or
I
you
just
nail
think a
the
lot of
large
those
straight
are the
though.
same.
You do one shake and nail the large straight. Do you actually know Yahtzee? Do you know that's a successful move when you
What is
shake
this
out the
now?
dice? Okay, never mind. I was
No,
hoping you were
I
gonna
have
be.
played Yahtzee, but it's been a while. So
It would have been hilarious if you were a Yahtzee guy, and that's like a common common comparison you make. But no, you roll like the 6 dice, and then you're like, boom, look at this. I got my large straight where it's like
yes,
1, 2, 3, 4,
yes,
5, 6.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I thought you said
Yeah.
large trade, and I was like, I'm not familiar with that, but I do know the large trade, the large straight. Yes.
Yeah. But so I gotta pull this up here. Where is it? I missed it. Okay, let me ask you this question, man. So we haven't had anybody on who's written a book or books in your case.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about how that even happened. Just like you as a person, you're getting into the space and you're like, oh, I'm gonna write a book.
So the way the book happened was it would have been the season of 2017. I got into DFS, and I had done Dynasty. I was covering Dynasty stuff. I was working with Chad at UTH. I was recording podcasts. I was doing a little writing, but nothing major. And I decided to sort of get into DFS. And so I started playing like 3 or 4 weeks of DFS. And I realized that I didn't know what I was doing. Right. I had a little bit of success week 1, and then I kind of came back like the next couple of weeks, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And it was, I realized that I was out of my league.
Okay.
And I said, I got to put a pin in this and come back to it. I'm just not smart enough, was basically the thing I came back to. And so I said, I'll pick it up in the off season. All right. Cause I wanted to look at patterns. I wanted to spend, I realized I needed a whole off season to like study.
Yeah. You need to take it seriously if you were going to keep doing
And I am no, people ask why I don't do IDP. People ask why I don't play Devy, because I would go down these rabbit holes if I did that. And so what I ended up doing was I spent like January, February, and March of that off season just diving into data. And I went back like 10 years. I did individual game logs. I aggregated just an incredible amount of data in terms of like going through all the stuff, all the start rate stuff. I just kept going and digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I kept coming out with Dynasty takeaways. Right. And I didn't intend to do that. I just kept coming out with Dynasty takeaways. So I just kind of like write them down. And what ended up turning out as a DFS research project became a very big outline for a very too big of a book.
That's so kick-ass, man.
And so, and at that point, I was doing a lot of research, and I had a newborn at home, and my wife's super supportive. And she said, what are you doing all this research for? And I said, well, and again, I have not at this point, I have the outline, and it's like February, right? Like the fantasy football season's over. And I'm like, well, I'm going to write a book. And so I ended up writing a book on it. And that was actually, I take that back. Yeah. So that would have been the 2018 off season. That would have been 2018 that I spent writing it. I wrote and wrote. And then I released it in January of 2019, the first one. And I didn't expect it to get much play, right? The reason that I wrote it was so that we could justify to my wife why I was spending so much time doing fantasy football research. And at least I could say, if I have a book, then at least it is a reason to continue doing it.
I get it.
And it sold surprisingly well to me.
It did pretty well right out the gates.
Yeah. And it was like, and it's funny because to sell it, I agreed to do strategy sessions with everyone that bought it. And let me tell you, it performed way better than I thought it would perform. And by the time like I got through the strategy sessions, I was like, no mas. Like I didn't.
Yeah. You had to cut that off.
And so I was like, all right, I'm done. I can't, And so, and then you got to try and track everyone down and schedule it, and people cancel. Like it was a huge, undertaking.
Yeah.
And so I was done. Right. I wrote the book. I was done. And then I started promoting it, and people would have questions about the book. And the questions about the book would mirror a lot of the questions that I got in the strategy sessions. And I said, well, I didn't intend to write a second edition. I didn't intend this to be like a franchise thing. I intended it to be a standalone evergreen book. And I started following up on the research questions that people asked, and that would be for podcast appearances. And I was hustling to make. I must have made 50 or 60 podcast appearances. I did every show that would have.
That's
me.
awesome, man.
And so I, in the process of that, had a whole bunch of questions that were unanswered, and I had all this data. So I went back and I redid it, right? And I came back with a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's actually the edition that came out with AWARP, was a 2020 edition, and which to this day is probably the most important thing I've ever written.
2020. It was that long ago. The
AWARP. That long ago. And so that was the edition that really changed it for me. And that was actually before I had Superflex data. And then it took a couple more years to get any reliable Superflex data. And now I've taken a pretty aggressive turn towards Superflex in terms of a lot of my coverage, but that's really how it all started. And I made a ton of mistakes along the way because I didn't plan on making a franchise, right? I didn't plan on making a business. I just planned on writing a book to assuage
but you probably know yourself better though, because you were saying like you would get into a rabbit hole if you started with like Devy and IDP. So surely you knew what you were getting yourself into by writing one book.
I didn't. Well, I knew.
Although it's such an undertaking.
Long. Like, I mean, it was like, I mean, and I don't know if you've ever written anything like of substance, but to go through and edit that thing is like, is incredibly arduous, at least for me, because I read what and I have a whole process. I've got a couple of editors. I sit down with one. We actually sit in a room and read the entire thing from front to back. And it's a completely humbling experience, because I think when I read it out loud and it sounds horrible, it's typically the first run through of it. And thank God for my editor, Jeff, who's like brilliant and patient and all those things. And Adam, they get me through that stuff. But yeah, it was a really, really hard thing to do. And that like, there's nothing that I dislike more than like the couple of weeks that I have to edit that book, because I just hate doing it.
It's not sexy. It's like, oh, you're editing your book. You're like, yeah, but it's like me with editing videos. Like, yeah, but this is the brutal time. You think it's fun.
Yeah. And I don't know if like you've ever read a transcript of you talking. Like, I've actually had to read a transcript of me talking for work, and it's like, I'm like nauseous after reading it.
It is absolutely
and that's really how the editing process to my books go. And so I don't like that aspect of it, but I like everything else of it. That's the hardest part. And so, so that's basically how it kind of became. So I didn't plan on it being a franchise. And so I made a lot of mistakes in terms of like how to plan the business in advance, because I didn't intend it to be like a money-making venture. And so the second time around, so then I wrote the 2020 edition. Released it in January of 2020 or February, right? Whatever, like it's usually the week between, it's usually Senior Bowl week. So it's usually the week between the off week, right? The week that's off from the AFC, from the championship week and the Super Bowl. It's usually that week that I release it. And so I did a whole, I do the promotional stuff, right? And actually, it was funny because that year I was unemployed at that point because I was changing jobs. And so I had like a 2-week window, and I was like, I will book any appearance that I could make. So I was just every podcast, anything, I must have done 25 in 2 weeks. And then I got my new job, and COVID happened. And I had started to toy around with creating a Patreon at that point. And so I created Patreon in the couple of weeks that I was off, and I was just going to start recording some stuff, and I was a couple of podcasts a week. And again, I had a little bit of a subscriber base because of the books. I had emails, and and people wanted more of the content, which I found out after I wrote the first one. And so I kind of capitalized on that with the second one, and then COVID happened. And I'm a lawyer by trade, and I was working in a law firm, which I found very quickly that that's not what I wanted to do. When I moved jobs in February of 2020, like it took me about a couple of months to figure out that's what I didn't want to do. But mid-March, I got, everyone got sent home. And so I was sitting at this desk I'm sitting at right now, and exactly where it's positioned. and super lonely, right? All the effects of COVID, right?
Oh, yeah.
Lonely, anxiety, depression, all that stuff, and hair looking terrible, unshaved, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
And I got a 2-year-old, so all that stuff is just, stressed out, am I going to lose my job? I've only been here 6 weeks, all that stuff. So I just said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to just every night at like 9 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and record a podcast, and I'll just release it the next day. And so I did that for like
hammering
94 straight days. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I did it 94 straight days or something like that. And I think I finally took a break in like whatever like 100 days from like mid-March would have been. And so I did a couple, I did a few more, and then I was like, I really like the pace of that. And so I just went back to hammering the rest of the off season. I did every day. And you come up with different ideas to talk about and all that stuff. And
Sure.
I just went sort of that route. And then the season came, and I was doing in-season stuff. And then I transitioned from Patreon to doing my own, through my own website.
Yeah.
And now you have your own individual podcast feed, right? Now you have an actual feed you can put into Apple Podcasts or whatever,
Right.
instead of it being a Patreon feed. And I can do stuff through the website. I got a couple of tools and stuff on there as well. So you get all that. But again, so each year I release 350 plus podcasts, right? And that's just kind of the thing that, I wanted to be the person that I couldn't get enough content. So I was like, I'm just going to kind of cater to me and just record kind of like every day.
That's
awesome. But you kind of learn to not record every day. You record 2 days a week and just
you batch.
Yeah. So that's kind of the deal. That's kind of how it all happened, right? And so that's basically how I got where I am.
That's wild, man. The 90 some odd days straight.
Yeah. Thank God for COVID, because I would have never taken that plunge. And it worked, right? Because people needed the entertainment.
It totally works. Yeah.
People needed the entertainment and wanted the relationship, right? Because like we had a group chat, but when you listen to a podcast, right, and when you listen every day, you get a certain, I release a podcast that, in the off season, it releases at 8 o'clock every morning. So people are listening to that on the way to work or whatever. That's as a listener to podcasts, that's a relationship I'm kind of building with them, even though I'm not talking, right? Like when I'm a listener, I'm listening to that. And I think that during the pandemic, I think that really hit with a lot of people, right? Because you needed that, there's a certain, loneliness aspect to it that people wanted to just kind of feel part of something. And I think I was just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
That's cool, man. So this guy has the big Diaz energy. He's using our streams a lot. What's up, man? He says, this has been quite an informative show. I need to rewatch this later with my full attention. I like this guy's insight. Yeah, there's been some awesome comments in the crowd. Can't believe we've been in here for 57 minutes. We'll just spend a few more in here if that's cool, man. So gosh, I could talk to you for a while about the whole book thing. I'm obsessed with I'm obsessed with content.
You got me for as long as you want me.
I'm more of the digital marketing side, like growing on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc. So I thought it was so interesting, to see it from like the book lens. And next week, actually, I have Pro Football Demon. I don't know if you know who he is, and I am going to find out what his real first name is here next week. But he does these really cool skit type things on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. He's like got a shaved head. I could share my screen or whatever, but he's like a Packers guy talking this way in the camera, and then he's like a Bears guy like responding. Very unique stuff. So I'm gonna have him on. But no, it's cool. We have to hit some dynasty questions from the crowd, guys. Sure. Go ahead and put them in. We are gonna we'll do this for 10 minutes with Jordan. We have to take advantage of this. Okay, so let's go to Kobe Bryant here. 12 team start 8, 1 QB. Would you trade Tyreek in the 105 for the 101? Wide receivers are Tyreek, Jamar, Olave, Puka. Currently in the championship. If I win, would you guys make the move? What do you think, man? Shallow.
I wouldn't. I definitely wouldn't do this before the championship. I'd probably just play Tyreek Hill.
Yes.
I think that people prematurely rebuild would be the thing that I would say. Like, what's your incentive to make this, right? Like, you want to get younger at wide receiver. You have Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, and Puka Nacua. Like, you've got a hammer right now. Just keep wielding it would kind of be my thought. Again, I don't trade up for receivers in rookie drafts. So I think anytime you're in the Dynasty team building guide that I released last year, I literally have as one of the rules in drafting, never trade up for a wide receiver. Right. So that's what this is doing, I think, in a start one quarterback. And I'm almost never going to be on that side. I'm never trade up for a first round rookie wide receiver, especially unless it's like at the bottom of a tier, right? Unless you're trying to sort of jump a tier, right? Jump into a tier. But that would be to like get the fifth guy, right? Not the first guy. So I wouldn't do that.
I see. And Puka was named on there. I have to side question. What did you learn from Puka Nacua this year, and what happened with him? Like his story and his ascent and his future. Go ahead.
So that's a great question. Chad and I actually on Dynasty Think Tank actually did this show yesterday. I don't even know if it's released yet. It's funny.
No, it did release. Yeah.
It did. Okay. I
want the crowd to hear it.
Charge was scheduling the release of it, and I couldn't remember when I scheduled the release of it.
You got it.
I think I made a mistake and was supposed to release it tomorrow. That's why I said that. I think that if you look at the next if you look at the receivers drafted this year from the day 3, right? So the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds of the draft, I think it was the median points per game scored this year was like 2.2. Nice. Okay, so 2.2 points per game. So that's incredibly invaluable, right? Like, so that's the first thing. Puka Nacua was drafted, I believe it was the 19th or the 20th guy, something like that this year. So he's way down that list, right? I think the couple of like lessons that I've learned from this is, number one, don't try and predict that guy, right? Because there is nothing, right? You could have liked Puka Nacua. Okay, you could have liked what he did. And Chad used a marker. I think he came out in like the 80th percentile of his database, which is like the source that I use for production. Like his database is as good as anything. And so I just sort of instead of trying to recreate my own, I just trust Chad's.
Can I use your Chad?
I try to recreate something that's smarter than I can do. But if you're not in the 90s of that database, like you're not in the category of guys that you should really be in on. Right.
So, you shouldn't be focusing your time and resources on anybody that's outside the 90s, right?
And he's an average. He's in every other way average, right? He's an average build. He's ran a 4.55, right? His jumps were unextraordinary, right? By every measure, Puka Nacua, of what we can measure, okay, of what we have access to, by every measure, he's ordinary, okay. And so I think the lesson to learn from that is there's a couple of things, right? Number one, don't try and predict it. Okay. Number two, there may be, we don't have access to it now, but there may be something that tells us the reason why Puka Nacua stands out. I suspect, right? I tend to think that there's digital information that we don't have access to that would answer these questions. Player tracking data. I wear a Whoop. Right. I still think that like the Whoop score stuff, if we knew that about quarterbacks, would tell us the developmental arc of quarterbacks. Right.
I don't know. A lot of like, I have to stop you real quick. What's a Whoop? You said I wear a Whoop.
So a Whoop is it's a wristband and it tells you like your strain, right? It tells you your heart rate stuff.
Gotcha.
And I think importantly for a lot of these guys, it would tell you their sleep score, right? Because it tracks your sleep and all your data through your sleep.
Got it.
And if you get really high, actually Mahomes wears one, and there's data from Mahomes during the Super Bowl run where he's actually at the end of that game, it shows they released his heart rate throughout the game, and you could see his heart rate.
That's awesome.
Down the stretch of the game. Yeah, the last one that he won, it was the one against Philadelphia. I think his heart rate never dropped below like a minute and 146 a minute for like the last
it was just hammering
45 minutes of that game. Like it was crazy high. I mean, almost like wildly high. Especially, and he wasn't even active. Like he was sitting on the sidelines for a portion of that. Like it was crazy high. But in any event, like there's data in terms of like biophysical stuff that I think that teams have access to that we don't. And I think like if we had that information, like I still think if you knew like how quarterbacks sort of lived off the field, it would tell you a lot about their development arc. Whether that's if they're in the gym or the library, or if they're out partying, or if they're taking their craft seriously and going to bed. Like we hear the stories about Burrow and like, him going to bed at like 8 o'clock every night. Like,
yeah, right.
If you knew that stuff, like you could predict, I think you could predict this stuff better, but we're never going to have access to it. Right. I do think, and I do wonder, and I'm always attuned to when people talk about player tracking data that us as ordinary people don't have access to, but there's people in the media, there's people that report on the stuff they do have access to that stuff. I think I think that would answer probably the question. And one of the things with go a long way to answering some of that, right? With Puka Nacua specifically, like I've heard that there's tracking stuff on him. I know that the Rams actually don't go to the combine and they just wait for the player tracking data to come out. Right. So, and that would
they don't want to be blinded. They want their eyes to be separate from the data. Maybe essentially is that what it is? Like
they think it's a waste of time that between the player tracking data and the tape that they watch, they can get more out of that time spent than going to the combine. Which is fascinating, right? And if you look at what they've done and who they've hit on from day 3 of the draft, that should speak to us, right? Again, that's not to say that you just pick every Ram, but that's to say that there's something there that we don't have access to. And by the way, Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua, both of which fit the profile of couldn't have predicted that from their college production or their physical traits. So the publicly available physical traits. So I think that there's stuff there that we can get at. But the other thing with Nacua, like we can't know which guy is going to come out of the draft and the first thing that he's going to do is go meet at 5 o'clock in the morning every day with Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. We don't know that.
You don't know that.
Which is the answer to the question, right? That's the thing that tells you why Puka Nacua stands out, right? Because his preparedness is far superior to anything that he has done in terms of his physical traits or his college production. And whatever that fit was, they just did a great job of scouting it and putting him in the right position. We can't predict that. And I think that people will spend the next 5 years trying to predict the next Puka Nacua. Every year is going to have a thread of who the next Puka Nacua is. I don't think we can predict it, right? I just think you got to be really careful about taking day 3 guys. The flip side of that, though, is once they reveal themselves, buy high on them. Okay. And when I say reveal themselves, when Puka Nacua does elite things like 30% target rates,
you're like, all right, I'm in. Yeah.
In weeks, you buy that at wide receiver 20, right? You buy that. You buy on the way up because the person that took him at round 4 sees a round 2 rookie pick as a profit, right? And if you're sort of in the business of saying, hey, I'm going to buy high on these profiles, I think that's the play, right? So it wouldn't be to try and buy them in advance, but it would be when you see elite reveal themselves before the market reacts to that, is to buy on that, right? I think that's the lesson to learn from Puka Nacua. So not to try and predict it, but once they reveal themselves, buy it would sort of be my thought.
Yeah, some people got some cheap Amon-Ra back in the day, you know, because I think there's receipts out there from our show, like our Amon-Ra show. There's some there's some takes that did not come to fruition because at the time I think we were looking at the data. There was a process reasoning behind our takes saying why we weren't necessarily buying 100% into Amon-Ra, but he hit. So some people like us either sold them cheap or bought them cheap. That's I like that, buying on the way up. They show themselves like, all right, I gotta snatch it up, buy it on the way up. Good stuff.
And if you look at and the one thing I would say about that too is like you got to truly buy elite stuff, right? Don't buy the fraudulent stuff. You got to truly buy the elite stuff. But when you look at some of the stuff that Amon-Ra St. Brown was doing, like down the stretch of that rookie season, right, as a day 3 rookie. Right. That's stuff you can't fake that. Right. You can't fake that. And from week 11 on of that season, he averaged 2.4 yards per route run. Right. You can't make that up. Right. You can't fake that. He averaged that season. He was targeted, in that stretch, he was targeted 72 times on 250 routes. That's 29%. You can't fake that. Right. That is elite. And you can't fake it. Right. And so I think that like when you see elite profiles that can't be faked, you have to sort of be in on them on the way up. And I think that that's the thing. Like that's why I was big on Christian Watson, because I said that profile, if it stays healthy, looks a lot like what Amon-Ra St. Brown did in his rookie season. It looks like a young AJ Brown. It looks like those guys. And that's, I think, the thing that that would be the piece of advice that I would have for folks.
That's good stuff, man. Actually, and on that, I guess kind of on that same thread, and we can end with this, but for less smart folks, like I'm listening to you talk, and it's like, man, I'm just not as smart as I think I may be. What give me 3 stats that we should pay attention to if we're, Dynasty Analytics 101. If we're gonna pay attention to 3 stats, what is it? Target share, air yards. Go ahead.
Oh, draft pedigree.
Yep. Draft capital.
Yep. Draft pedigree. Your prior, if you've hit or not before. So that would be like if you've hit whatever. The metric that I use is for quarterbacks, it's a top 12 finish. For tight ends, it's a top 12. And for wide receivers and running backs, it's a top 24. And so if you've hit for any of those metrics, right, that's a good indicator. That's what I would consider putting you on a density track, right? And I actually laid all out in the book. You go from a base rate, which is, do you just generally hit, versus the guys that, okay, now you've hit, sort of how dense is that hit? The guys that have hit become much more likely to hit again than the guys that haven't hit, right? So I think, understanding, and I actually have a grid.
To make it visual.
It shows you. So just if you know nothing else between, how it has what round was the player drafted in, and what's their hit status. So, right, is it 1? Is it 0? Is it 1? Is it 2? Multiple? Whatever. Right. That alone will tell you a great deal about the player. Right. So I think like that's the stuff to look at. There's more data too that like. This is like, those are the 2 basic things. So if you knew nothing else, like I like to say, I could kind of teach my wife, who doesn't know anything about football, I could give her like 5 or 6 steps to just draft a successful.
To crush it, to crush a draft.
Right. And just to go do that, right. Just don't draft guys that are basically day 3 picks, draft top 10 quarterbacks, right. Don't draft day 3 wide receivers. Like just do, there's a couple of things to do.
This is the 10 commandments or whatever.
Right.
With this.
right. And I have that all in the Dynasty team building guide that I released. And so you can kind of go see all that. So I have like all those rules, but those would be the 2 things that I would kind of point to. And then I think the other thing that I would preach is this: at receiver, the only thing that matters is targets. Okay. It doesn't matter how they look. It doesn't matter how good they make you feel. It matters how many times they're targeted. Okay. And the points per target for a player is highly variant from year to year, but targets predict fantasy points. It's the amount of targets someone has explains about 90% of their fantasy points.
There's a huge correlation there.
A huge correlation. Right. And so the outliers, you bet against the outliers, right? So if there's a guy that's averaging, 2.4, 2.5, DJ Moore, right, you're going to bet on him to regress, right? Because that's never been sustainable. Historically, it's impossible to sustain for a long time. No one's really ever done it. So he's either the greatest wide receiver that's ever happened, or he's subject to regression, which I would submit to you that he's subject to regression.
Probably the latter.
The same thing is true on the other side, right? Guys that are consistent, there was a season where, the average usually is about 1.65 points per target. And there was a season where it was actually Allen Robinson and DeAndre Hopkins did it in the same season. They averaged like 1.3 on 151 targets. And you would come out of that being like, man, that was a huge disappointment for DeAndre Hopkins. Like, what a bad season. The next season, he finished as wide receiver 1, the very next season. And if you took his wide receiver 1 season and his wide receiver in the season that he was a huge disappointment in, and you added them up and you added up the points, divided them by the targets that he had amongst 2 seasons, came out exactly in the window of like 1.65, right? And so that tells you, and again, this all checks out historically. I've done a ton of research on this, and I'm not the first one, right? This is work that I've sort of, branched out on that's been already there. So again, those things are super important, right? There's, higher level stuff that you can go on from there, but like just understanding those handful of things, I think it'll prevent you from sort of, you just want to be firing in the right direction. Those things will put you in that direction.
No, that's super helpful, because there's lots of stuff out there, and it's always nice to get a, I guess, some of it weeded out. With that being said, I forget, what was it, Tommy Blair earlier that I put his tweet on there. He said, if there's anything you're going to subscribe to, make it AOD. So I can tell you are not one to really pitch yourself. Well, maybe you are if you're going to go on these like rampages of inviting yourself on the podcast, trying to promote your book. Maybe you're all about promoting, apparently, but you come off quite humble. But not right now. Plug Analytics of Dynasty. You have a million tools on there. You got the human hand grenade, which I love. Talk about yourself, Ben. Give yourself a plug.
Yeah, so you can find all the content at analyticsofdynasty.com. I am right, so I'm half toying with the idea of creating an audiobook, because I just can't go through the editing process right now. I just can't subject myself to it after the season. So I might release an audio version of it, but that won't be probably until later on in the off season. It's not forthcoming, and I haven't committed to it, but I might. But you can go get the Dynasty team building guide. It's evergreen, right? That'll always be there. And I think it'll always be helpful, right? And it's not, hey, pick these players for 2023. It's like, here's your strategy, right? So that's always there, right? That's kind of if I were to say that I have, like, I've written, I think 7 books at this point, 7 or 8. That's the one that I would say, like, that is the that's the
you
thing.
Like to point people to that. Like, it's like when you give a restaurant recommendation to somebody from out of town, you've got your go-to. It sounds like you're very proud of and saw growth from that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like, I've written 5, I wrote 4 yearly editions before that, and they were all like topical. So they were all on like different things. And there was never like a cohesive, all put together strategy. And the Dynasty Team Building Guide is that, right? That was basically, that was putting it all together in one spot to say, all right, from beginning to end, like, here's the way to play. So that was good, right? That's the place I'd probably start with. If you're into Dynasty, right? If you listen to podcasts, analyticsdynasty.com, right? I think it's $350 a year. I release 7 or 8 a week. I've pared down one of them to allow the content schedule to be out more conveniently for others. I'll probably add that back in next year, an 8th one, but like later on in the week. But yeah, I mean, you're getting 350 plus podcasts a year. And you're getting, all sorts of Dynasty content. We got a trade database. We got a real draft tracker. And honestly, the best part of, this has been a tough year for some personal stuff for me. And the thing that got me through it the most, like, Dynasty is a great escape. And there's been no better escape for me than my GroupMe chat, right? Where I've made real friends, right? Real relationships with folks of all over the world. Which has been awesome, right? Different continents, right? Different countries. It's been great, right? And I would put up my subscribers in there against anyone in the world to play, because I think that they're brilliant. And honestly, probably the thing that I'm maybe most proud about from the Dynasty Team Building Guide is the fact that 2 of my subscribers actually wrote chapters in it.
Oh, that's kick-ass. Yeah, it's inspiring. Yeah.
And one of them was like a brand new Dynasty GM when he first found AOD. And now I see him in that GroupMe chat, being a leader and being, teaching other folks. And you saw him write, and you see his teams, and you see him dominate. It's awesome, right? So all that stuff is really great. Like, so just even beyond the content, like just the relationship aspect there, I think is really great. So you can find that all at analyticsdynasty.com, and just go in the shop, and you can find that, and all the tabs are up on the top to go find that. But yeah, you can go get that and join us. Like, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, we do our best to, we always focus on content and community. The only reason we've had success growing is because of our community. We have an awesome time in our Patreon. We have a Discord, and Shane lives in there. Scott lives in there. I get in there, as much as I can. I have to run this channel as well. But the relationships we build in there, we've done like voice and video chats with them and stuff. And I wanted to meet the patrons. We're on this app called Did It, where you can get free fantasy advice. I'm sorry, free first call fantasy advice. And it's like, hey, patrons, hit me up on Did It. I want to meet you guys, because it's very cool when somebody is like, hey, I'm going to commit this amount of dollars per month to you to support your channel. So it's cool stuff, man.
Yeah, it's great. I'm still trying to schedule an AOD meetup. Like, I still want to have everyone get together.
It's funny you're saying that, man, because we want to do that too. And we were thinking Pittsburgh would be a fit for us. I'm in Baltimore area, and then Scott's in Ohio, and then Shane's in Philly. So where would you? We're trying. Who knows? Maybe we could do one big joint thing.
Vegas week 1 of the NFL season.
Vegas, that's where you're doing it.
Yeah, that's what I
that's kick ass.
Yeah, Mrs. AOD is in the process of putting it, of putting some thoughts together. My wife, who I call Mrs. AOD, she's in the process of putting some thoughts together on that. So stay tuned. But you can find McNamara at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter as well, and Dynasty Think Tank with Chad. Right, go find wherever you get your podcast, Dynasty Think Tank. Chad and I get together every week, and we've got a Patreon there as well. So you can find all that content. Just follow me on Twitter, and I'm sure I'll be abrasively making comments to somebody in the near future.
It's good stuff. And I think our subscribers, our tribe, as we call them, they like the fact that we don't mess around. We just get right into it. We never do any intros of any sorts. Chad and Jordan are the same. I mean, when I hear you, it's like right into it. I think maybe 30 seconds of Chad pleasantries, right? But no, you guys get right into the content, man.
And we record an after-hours show that is literally we hit the Zoom. Chad logs in, I hit record, and the first thing you hear on our after-hours show is the first thing we say to each other. So it's literally that, So we get right into it. And it's fun. I'm excited for the off season because it's like research project time, which is like I think my favorite time. So
there's definitely it's bittersweet. All right, dude. Well, I'm gonna end this stream. Thanks again for hopping on, and thanks to the 64 in the crowd. We had a bunch of people with us the entire time. Hit that like on your way out if you'd be so kind. Easiest way to help out the channel. But Jordan, this was kick ass, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll see you later, everyone.